It is that time of year again where we look back at all our favourite reads of the year. And while I didn't read as many books as I would have liked in 2024, the quality was definitely up there, so I can't really complain. So let's look at my top 10 reads of 2024. These are in no particular order, because even just picking 10 is hard enough. Putting them in order, no. First on up, we have the Queen of Fantasy herself. Wow, that was a really smooth catch. Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. What is there to say about the Farseer trilogy, the second book in particular? Now, I loved Assassin's Apprentice, which I read last year. However, I do think the Royal Assassin overall is the better book. But that being said, I have a really special place in my heart for the ending of Assassin's Apprentice. I do think that the ending of Assassin's Apprentice is probably one of my favourite endings to a fantasy book. Just the amount of heartbreak, and it isn't like this huge battle, it's not like Oathbringer levels of epic, but it's just, oh man, the feels at the end of this is rough. However, Royal Assassin, the ending was great. It was really good. This whole book is fantastic. Robin Hobb has the magic in her writing that just immerses you into the story. It's so rare to find, but when you find an author that just hits with that sort of effect of just drawing you completely into this world, it's just the best feeling ever. It's why we read and why we try different authors, to try and capture that feeling of the books that really just grab you. And Robin Hobb is definitely one of those authors for me because of her prose style. Her writing is absolutely beautiful. The way she writes, it just flows so nicely. Next one up, we have The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. Now, I thought I would like this book, but I am so surprised about how much I enjoyed this book. And not only that, but I think out of even all of the top 10, this might be the one I think about the most. After finishing it, I'm just so desperate to get back into this world with these characters. It's just so much fun. So a little bit about the book. This is a murder mystery with this biomutagenic magic system. We follow an investigator called Din who works under this detective called Anna. And Anna is very Sherlock Holmes inspired. She's very bizarre and witty and funny. This is a surprisingly funny book with lots of scenes, especially with Anna. This has a fascinating setting where society lives behind this giant wall that is regularly attacked during the wet season by these giant leviathans. And this is only touched on a little bit in this first book. It does mainly focus on this murder mystery. And the murder mystery itself was just a ton of fun. Learning more about these characters, more about this world, was just a blast. And I would love like a 10-book series with little fantasy murder mystery adventures, slowly learning more about this world and these characters, while solving these mysteries with all the quirk and style that Robert Jackson Bennett brought to this series. If you've not read this yet, I highly, highly recommend. And also the audiobook is terrific. Next on up, we have The Silver Blood Promise by James Logan. Now, aside from the absolutely stunning cover, this is a really fun fantasy book. This is also kind of a murder mystery style story where we follow Lucan, who goes to this city called the City of Lies, or Sophrona, to learn about why his father was killed. And Lucan is a great character. The dialogue in this book is terrific. The banter and the back and forth between him and, well, Flea for a while, but also some of the other side characters as well, is just a ton of fun to read. I also thought the world itself was really, really cool. And again, this is one of those cases where we've just kind of seen the tip of the iceberg. We kind of get hinted at this wastelands that are up, I believe, north of where the story takes place, where they find these ancient relics where it's an unknown technology, so it implies this kind of lost history, this lost people, and I absolutely love that. That just whole implication of unknown and mystery with the world is one of my favorite things in fantasy, so I had a blast with this one. So I am very much looking forward to picking up the sequel, Blackfire Blade, next year. Now this next book is also a murder mystery. Can you tell I went on a murder mystery spree around summer? That is Murder at Spindle Manor. Now this is a self-published book, the winner of the SPFBO last year or this year. And if you have seen the movie Knives Out, this is like the book version of that with fantasy elements. This is so much fun. Again, this is just a really fun, quirky character murder mystery where it takes place in this manor, this house, where this huntress is trying to find out which of the guests are currently infected with a parasite, where the parasite killed them and then took their body and is pretending to be them. And also there's a murder. The Tainted Cup and Silver Blood Promise were terrific books. Again, fantastic. But I will say that this mystery is probably the most interesting of the other ones. Not in most interesting story, just if you look at the mystery side of it, I think this one has a really fascinating mystery to follow and kind of piece together. This isn't so much funny as it is quirky and entertaining. You read it and there's just some really bizarre characters with really interesting personalities and lots of interesting conversations, but you're also trying to piece together the parts of the mystery and the puzzle and trying to figure out who might be this parasite, while also learning about these guests who have all come together as one party, so you're figuring out dynamics, and all of that just makes this a ton of fun. And on top of this, Morgan does a really good job of just kind of teasing the world building. Especially in this first book, we don't really get much information about it at all. We get told things, but we don't get told why they are that way, which is something I really like, because in some other books, you'll get authors who just want to info dump the information as soon as it's mentioned, despite the fact it's not necessarily tied to the story. However, Morgan does a really good job of just telling you what you need to know for the story and leaving just this little taste of, look, there's some more. You can learn more about this world if you pick up the rest of the series. Really fun, and it's also super short, so if you're looking for something just to as a little palate cleanser, something a wee bit different, highly recommend. And I really need to continue on with this series next year. Oh man, my copy's a bit bashed. Before you say no, it's not because I was throwing it up. I've not done that yet. Next on up, we have a big chunky beefy boy that is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. Now this has been on my radar for a while, but it's not necessarily one that I would have picked up, I don't think, unless I was prompted by the people over at Hardy's Books. They were doing a read-along and chatting about it, and it just sounded really good, so I was like, okay, fine, I'll start listening to the audiobook, and I fell in love. This is a really good book. It's a long, chunky book. It's about 900 pages. This is an alternate history England with magic, and we follow a bunch of characters, mainly Mr. Norrell. I was called out for saying his name wrong, and now I can't remember which one's right, so it might be Norrell rather than Norrell. I think it's Norrell. My bad. Who's trying to bring magic back to England. It covers years and years of time, and we follow a bunch of different characters, and it reads more like a life and events rather than a plotted out narrative, because it does cover so much over such a long time, and there's lots of different threads that are being pulled together to create this story. It is fascinating, it's fantastic, it's incredibly atmospheric and immersive, especially the audiobook. It also does have some quirky and fun moments as well as some very dark moments. It really does have a bit of everything. Next one up, you knew it was coming. You knew it was coming. Let's talk about it. Dungeon Crawler Carl. When I first made this list, I was very tempted to put all 3 books this year on the list. I thought, no, Andrew, you can't put all 3 books on the list. So I've shortened it down to 2 of them. But no, technically all 3 are on this list. In my heart, they're all on this list because this is just one continual story and I love them all. They're like children. I can't pick my favorite. We have Butcher's Masquerade, which is book 5. I have The Bedlam Bride, which is book 6. And I'm also currently reading This Inevitable Ruin, which is book 7. Now, if you don't know about this series, you must be new here. This is Dungeon Crawler Carl. This is about a man called Carl and his cat Donut. They get put on this alien TV show. Aliens come down, they kill most of the planet, and the rest of them go on down into this dungeon that is an alien TV show. And this series continues to impress me with every book. Every book has something a little bit different that I love about it. Butcher's Masquerade was really a big, epic moment with the titular Butcher's Masquerade. just that whole sequence was one of the best in the entire series. That was such a blast. And Matt does a terrific job of just introducing new elements to every single book without it feeling like it's just being tacked on. It feels so natural in its progression. It's so incredibly addictive, this series. The Eye of the Bedlam Bride I loved a lot. I'm technically not including it on this list because I'm including the other two to make this a list of 10, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. What I really liked about this one was the big picture movement. There were some really hints to this overarching story outside of this Alien TV show, which have me really excited about the future books in this series. And I am currently reading The Inevitable Ruin, and this is a big book in the series. This covers faction wars, which once you get into the series, you'll see that's a major event in this story, and I am so amped. Already I'm loving this story. And I've talked to people who finished it, and they have a lot to say, but they're not allowed to talk to me about it until I finish it. So I'm guessing it's really good. Yep, Dungeon Crawler Carl is one of my favorite series of all time. It was going to be on this list. It was... duh. Next up, we kind of have another two-parter. We have Bands of Mourning and also The Lost Metal, books 3 and 4, and Era 2 of Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. Now, Brandon Sanderson was the author that brought me back to reading. He's the reason that I'm reading adult fantasy now, and the reason that I made this channel, really, if we trail all the way back, is because I read Mistborn, Era 1, that brought me back into reading. So, continuing on with the Mistborn series, I was very, very excited, and I'm glad to say that they did live up to my expectation. Now, I really like Era 2. It does follow different characters from Era 1. I really like Wax and Wayne, and also Steris. I do think Marcy, I don't know how to pronounce her name, I've not heard it said out loud. I read these physically, not through the audiobook, but Marcy, I think is her name, I thought really shined in The Lost Metal, and I also thought Steris really shined in Bands of Mourning. And Wayne is just terrific the whole series, and Wax is also great. The end of Bands of Mourning is probably the strongest, apart from the end of the Hero of Ages, in the whole of the Mistborn series. I loved the ending to this book. It was absolutely terrific. It was epic. It was big scale. It had this sort of Indiana Jones feel to it. It just felt like a really big epic ending, and I loved it very much. Now, The Lost Metal does have a lot of hype to live up to. This is the last book in the second era of Mistborn, and this is probably one of the most tightly paced books I've read from Sanderson. I found it really hard to put this down. Every single day, I read a bit of this and I had to put it down and go work and be a human, which kind of sucks, but you know, it happens. And all I could think about was getting back and reading another 50 pages and just sneaking some pages in before I had to do more work, because I do think this, just as a reading experience, was really, really good. I also loved how much more Cosmere tie-ins we got in this book. This really is starting to get into the bigger picture of the Cosmere, where we're starting to see some big players making moves, and this is the first book I've really felt like we're starting to zoom out a bit outside of Stormlight and see a bit more of what's going on in the background. And that element I really, really enjoyed. I kind of wish he lent more into it, especially with a certain faction, and I know that that's going to be a lot of Era 3, and this was just kind of the hint and setup that they are running in the background, which just has me super excited for Era 3. And the last book on this list is kind of cheating because I'm currently reading it. However, if I didn't mention it, it would be a complete sin, and it's my list, so I'm including it. Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson, the 5th book in the Stormlight series. Now, Stormlight is probably, in fact, there's no probably about it, Stormlight is my favorite series of all time, and this is the 5th book and the final book in the first arc. So this is going to be a 10-book series, so 5 books, and then there's going to be a big gap in time where I think he's writing other works, mainly Mistborn Era 3, before he comes back to Stormlight. So this should close a lot of the large arcs in this story. And these books are huge, and this one is the biggest so far. It's over 490,000 words. 490,000 words. Just for some context, Lord of the Rings is 480,000 words. So it's longer than Lord of the Rings, which is, it is meant to be one book, but it is often bound up as 3. But no, this is book 5 and it's 490,000 words. It's a long book. That does have me a little bit concerned about the pacing of this story. However, so far, the pacing has been really good. Particularly the start really brings you into the story and sets up the motivations and the feeling of progression very quickly, which was something I was very impressed with because I thought it would be a lot slower being a story of this size. No, there was no wasting time. We kicked off this story and we were straight in, and we've already had some really interesting developments in the narrative. So I'm having an absolute blast returning to Roshar with these characters. I will do a more comprehensive final thoughts or review or reading vlog or something for it when I'm done, but just know that so far I'm having a great time and it definitely deserves a spot in my top 10 reads of the year so far. And if you want to see what books I plan to read in 2025, you can check out this video here. Thank you very much for watching. Outro. In the Black Mantle, I also read that and thought it was pretty good. You should buy it.